Here's one I prepared earlier. Okay, actually, I'll tell you why I didn't prepare it earlier. I mocked up what we did on the basis because this is how things work in reality. Okay? I want to point out some things to you, and we're going to discuss them and understand why they're significant mathematically. Okay, and I'd like you to follow along as we label these on. Okay, I asked you to point out, like literally put a point on the 4 spots on the graph where our lines intersect here in the middle. Okay, these 4 spots. Let me explain the way they work. Okay, the first pair of spots, they're in pairs. The first pair of spots I'm going to look at are these two here, where this line, the red one, which is our, that's a premium product, our expensive line, intersects with our too cheap line. Okay, like that. All right. So you've got a point down here. It's called the PMC. The PMC. The PMC stands for the point of marginal cheapness. The point of marginal cheapness. Now let me explain. Okay, what is this line here? The very first one we drew. Okay, this line represents this thing's too cheap. Clearly, it's a bit dodgy, right? Maybe it fell off the back of a truck. It's illegal, something like that. Okay, it's cheap. It's not a good thing, right? So this line represents I don't want to buy this product. Okay, I don't want to buy it. But it does intersect with a very, very small number of people who still think, I think this thing's pricey. Okay, that's the intersection point. We've got the point of marginal cheapness down here. Okay, it's not a really good point because you're not making that much of a profit. It's a lower price over here, but it's okay. All right, you've got a pretty low number of people here who flat out won't buy the product because it's too cheap. Okay. That's the PMC. Over here on the opposite side is the PME. If this is the point of marginal cheapness, what do you think PME stands for? Point of? Marginal expensiveness. That's not a real word, but anyhow, it gets across the idea, right? That in between here and here, we've transitioned across now people thinking, yeah, this is actually kind of more on the expensive end of things, right? In between these, and this is not on the diagram, in between them here, right? This is what we call the acceptable price range. The acceptable price range. And it's very important that you get, it's a range. It's a range. There isn't a single right price for whatever object or service you're selling, okay? And all companies know this. Example, if you go to Macca's, right? How much would you expect a Big Mac to cost, roughly?
$7 in a meal. In a
meal, $7. I think that's reasonable.
Large meal.
$7.
Meal is $7.
Okay, at different times, different things, right? Now here's the thing, though. If you go to like Castle Hill Macca's, okay, and then if you go to Parramatta Westfield Macca's, and then if you go to Penrith Macca's, they're all going to give you different prices, right? Because there is a range here. Right? They're all pricing, they're all pricing differently. Sometimes, quite significantly. I'll come back to the point, remind me at the end of this. Okay? Anyhow, in between our PMC and our PME over here, any spot within here, that's actually an okay price. That's an okay price. But there are 2 other points that are important here. This one up the top is called the IPP. And this one down the bottom is really, really important. It's called the OPP. Okay? So the IPP, you can see it from the screen. It stands for the indifference price point. It's the indifference price point. Because this is clearly an important point where these 2 worlds intersect. You got some people who are kind of like your cheaper people, and they're looking for lower prices. And over here, you're your art market people. And this is where you've got the intersection between those, right? But it's called the indifference price point because unlike these lower lines here, right, the too expensive and the too inexpensive line, it's not a hard, I would not buy that at all. Or I definitely must buy this. It's kind of, I'm kind of in between. I'm neither here nor there. Okay? So that's why it's called the indifference price point, because often it makes people, it's indifferent to it. I'm not clearly in one boat or another. But this guy down here, the OPP, much more important. If there is a single point on here that we should figure, that's the best price. It's the optimal price point, right down here. Okay, and let me try and explain why. What are these 2 lines that are meeting? On this graph, it's the blue and purple. On mine, it's the blue and black. What are those lines? Look at the key. It's the line which is too cheap, too inexpensive, right? Versus the line which is too costly, too expensive, right? Down here, this is the point that minimizes both in a balanced way, okay? It's got the least number of people who will reject it because it's too cheap, and the least number of people who reject it because it's too expensive, right? Does that make sense? So that's the best, if there is a single best point, that's the best point. We call that the optimal price point. You've got this here, which is kind of minimizing your people who won't buy it. These guys over here, there's a spectrum, right? Back on where you wrote the PMC, the disadvantages of the PMC are, because it's a lower price, right? What does that mean about your profit margin?
Lower.
It's smaller, isn't it? You're not going to make as much profit. And your upmarket people, who they want a more expensive product because it means quality, less of them will buy it because it's too cheap. Over here, what does this mean? This means it's going to be more expensive. What are our disadvantages? Think about the disadvantages I told you here, which are lower profit margin, and you get rid of your upmarket people. What are the disadvantages over here? Okay, some people are just going to say, I can't afford it. Can't afford it. I don't have that kind of money to throw around. And in addition to that, because less people are going to buy it from the get-go, because it's more expensive, you've got less ability for word of mouth to kind of spread around and say, hey, wow, you know, this Apple Watch really is the best thing that ever happened to me. Not that many people are going to say it because it's just too expensive to even get into the market. Okay? So, all of that is how we understand the prices. This has a name, by the way. I'll just scroll up the top. You might want to jot it down. This is named after a Dutch economist called Peter van Westendorp. You can go look at this. It's called a price sensitivity meter, and it's all different based on whatever kind of object you're charging for. Whether it's an Apple Watch, or the cost of your mobile phone plan, or a Big Mac meal. Okay?